Back in the days when game releases were not equal and Japan lived months, if not years, ahead of us on release date meantime, game imports were a fascinating thing to me. I'd hear of this well-regarded Japanese exclusive game from some forum goers or a gaming magazine would review one, and it just got that sense of wonder sparking. It felt like hidden gems were ripe and abound in Japan, and no matter how much you thought you knew all there was to know about the games you loved, there was always more to find out about just out of reach. Some would eventually make their way to the West in English, like Professor Layton and its sequels for instance, and some would never see the Western sun to this day, looking at Mother 3. The anticipation, and even the disappointment, is something that I honestly miss, which is probably why I enjoy exploring region exclusives so much now. Feels like I can reignite those early 2000s days of childlike wonder. I say all this because the games I'm reviewing today were very popular imports, and considering the legacy they've managed to create, it's easy to see why.
Tatakae! Ouendan!
Tatakae Ouendan is a game series about stressful situations and a band of all-male cheerleaders, and simply put, it's glorious. It's also about rhythm too, I guess. That's an important aspect. This is a rhythm game at the end of the day, after all. The series was developed by Enus between 2005 and 2007 for the Nintendo DS, and despite being a very dead series, it left quite an interesting impact. You might recognize the gameplay as being the same as that of the popular PC game Osu, namely as it started off as a fan game. So the games have certainly lived on well past their releases, even if they might not necessarily be as famous. There are 3 games in the series, with 2 being exclusive to Japan and 1 being exclusive to the West, a very unique situation to say the least. And there's a few reasons for this, with the main ones being 1, the original game is steeped in Japanese culture, which at the time was not very much in the public gamer consciousness, and 2, instead of original music, the games have popular songs from their respective regions instead, so you can imagine that would lead to some copyright issues. The first game was incredibly popular as an import, prompting developers to want to bring it to the West. Instead of localizing it though, they ended up creating a whole new game that drops the unapologetic Japanese-centric style in favor of a more American vibe, featuring a variety of songs in English. It's honestly an impressive feat of localization, you certainly wouldn't get it these days. But while I do love Elite Beat Agents, that's not our focus today. What we are looking at is the Japanese games, the original being the titular Tatakae Ouendan, and the sequel being Moero Neketsu Rhythm Damashi Tatakae Ouendan 2. You couldn't ask for a more unwieldy title, and translating it is no easy task either. Seriously, if you put Moero in a dictionary, the first result is this game. But without going all in on what every aspect of it means, both titles are essentially shouts of enthusiasm and encouragement, which is really what the games are about, so fair. I'm gonna just say this now for my own peace of mind, the gameplay you're gonna be seeing here is going to be abysmal. I'm capturing footage on an emulator and it turns out I'm terrible with a mouse, and I often wasn't recording when I did do well on a level cause, you know, I had to retry most of them an undisclosable amount of times. I've 100%ed all 3 games in physical form, you've gotta believe me. Anyway, the game has you as the field team leader of the Ouendan, an all-male cheerleading squad who are essentially superheroes who empower people in need through the power of dance. Episodic missions introduce you to each client as they're thrust into undesirable situations before they eventually call out to the Ouendan to come save them. To give you some examples, in one scenario you have a student studying for his college entrance exams, but is being consistently interrupted by his noisy family. In another, there's a struggling pottery artist who's lost his mojo, so he tries out various hobbies to find new inspiration. And in yet another, you have a young werewolf going on a date, who starts to turn if he sees anything vaguely resembling the full moon, and you cheer him on as he tries to restrain himself. And that is far from the most ridiculous scenario you're going to find in this game. There's even a mandated emotional level in each one, which drops the usual loud silliness for a more somber and heartfelt affair. It is pure joy seeing the variety and ridiculousness on offer, and it always leaves me with a silly grin on my face. It's worth noting too that the Ouendan don't actually interfere with any of these situations. The clients actually deal with all the problems themselves, they simply need some hardcore encouragement. And I just love how fun and wholesome that concept is. And yet, you don't have time to be paying attention to the fun animations going on at the top of the screen. No, that luxury is for the people who aren't playing a hectic rhythm game on the bottom one. That said, the gameplay is actually pretty simple. Numbered circles appear on the touchscreen and you've got to tap them just as an outer ring closes in on them. Sometimes you have to hold and slide the stylus along a track as well, and rarely a spinning wheel pops up, which means that it's time to give up if you're using a mouse. Depending on your timing, you'll get scored for each tap, which will then help fill an ever-falling gauge at the top of the screen. If that gauge runs out, you get a game over, and if it doesn't, by the end of the song, you win. Nice and simple. And if you play through the game once, you'd be forgiven for thinking it's a rather quick and easy affair. And then you unlock the next difficulty, and you get thrown in the bin for thinking so lightly of its skill flaw. Inputs become increasingly more complex, and missing beats even slightly becomes a genuine fear as the score bar's appetite for perfect timing grows. And then you unlock another difficulty, and the game is no longer a romp through fun scenarios and songs, it's a fight for survival against an onslaught of fast circles and hidden beats. Seriously, the final difficulty mode is brutal, but the satisfaction that comes from surpassing such obstacles is incredibly addictive. Flying by the seat of your pants and deftly gliding around the screen to the rhythm is something truly special. The songs are pretty great too, even if they are just covers. You've got such greats like Bambina, Shonen Heart, Kokoro Ororu, and Koi no Dance Site. But of course, barring perhaps Linda Linda or Monkey Magic, chances are slim that you actually know any of these songs prior. That doesn't stop them from being what the kids would call absolute bangers. It's a great place to find some cool artists you might have never heard of, and since they are all covers, all the more incentive to actually look them up. The sequel especially has quite the stellar lineup of songs. Call out to Hitomi Yaida's Go My Way. The music video is well worth your time. And if the single player wasn't enough for you, there is a multiplayer mode, because of course you have friends who want to play Ouendan with you. It even runs on download plays, so only one cartridge necessary for 4 players. Couldn't tell you what that's like though. Seriously, it'd be almost easier to round up a full game of Four Swords Adventures than convince my friends to play a rhythm game with me. Side note, anyone want to bring a GBA and link cable over to play some Four Swords Adventures? In terms of the required Japanese level in order to play these games, it'd be a stretch to say any skill is necessary. The gameplay is completely universal, with no understanding required to do any of it. And you can pretty much get the gist of what's going on through the strong visuals anyway. Even if we theoretically pretend that reading is necessary, it's pretty basic stuff. The sequel does happen to be a bit more complex with its script and kanji usage, but that really doesn't change its accessibility. You can see why it was such a popular import game at the time, since anyone could pick it up and play it really easily. Unsurprisingly due to this, there isn't a lot to be said in terms of learning practice opportunities here. There's just not enough substance to warrant any intentional effort to learn anything. If you already know the vocab, there's no meat to really give the player any good revision, and if you don't know the vocab, then there's no time to actually stop and learn it. Even on the listening side of things, you'll be way too busy with the gameplay to really try your hand at deciphering the lyrics. Doesn't stop you from engaging with the songs outside of the game, of course. But ultimately, if I was listing off games I finished in Japanese, putting Ouendan on that list would feel like filler rather than anything to be proud of. Ultimately, the game is well worth your time regardless, language learner or not. There's a reason the gameplay has actually found a second wind through the popular fan game Osu, even if it does lose most of the charm. It's just a simple rhythm game at its heart, but the sheer love put into the presentation skyrockets the enjoyment levels. Great missions, great songs, great difficulty spike. See if you can track down a copy, you won't be disappointed. I'd give it a Daiseko out of 10.